I booked the place in March, about 3 weeks before we were supposed to leave. 2 weeks in McClellanville, South Carolina, a small town on the coast, maybe an hour north of Charleston, the kind of place where the main street has a hardware store and a church and not much else. I'd found the rental on Varbo. The listing had good photos, a reasonable price, and a back porch that faced Jeremy Creek. It had a dock. That was the part that sold me. Evan had been through a rough year. I'm not going to get into all of it here, but he was 7, and he'd had a bad stretch, and he needed somewhere quiet and slow. No crowds, no noise. Something to look at that wasn't a wall or a parking lot or the inside of a waiting room. The shrimp boats came up Jeremy Creek in the mornings, and I knew he'd like that. I figured 2 weeks of watching boats go by and catching crabs off the dock would do more for him than anything else I could think of. That was the whole plan. That was it. Kathy came with us. She and I had been together about 1.5 years at that point, and she was good with Evan. Patient, easy, didn't talk down to him. The drive down from DC took about 9 hours with stops. Evan slept through most of Virginia, woke up somewhere in North Carolina, and spent the rest of the drive asking questions about shrimp. Not the boats, the actual shrimp. I didn't know most of the answers. Kathy made some up. He accepted them. We got to the house around 6 in the evening. It was a raised low-country house, wood frame, gray-painted siding, sitting up on concrete piers with maybe 4 feet of open space underneath. The kind of house that's been sitting in salt air for a long time and knows it. There was a screen door on the front that slapped shut behind you, and the porch boards were soft in a couple spots near the railing. The yard was mostly sand and scrub grass, and past the yard was the dock, and past the dock was the creek. And Evan stood at the top of the porch steps and looked at all of it for a long moment without saying anything. "Good?" I asked him. He nodded once. That was enough. Inside was fine, clean, reasonably furnished. A couch with a slipcover, a kitchen table with mismatched chairs, a ceiling fan in the living room that wobbled a little when it ran. There were 2 bedrooms. The front bedroom faced the road, and the back bedroom faced the creek. I walked both and made the call fast, the way you do when something seems obvious. Evan got the back bedroom. Creek view, morning light, shrimp boats. It felt like the right call. It felt like nothing at all. I put his bag in there, set up his little travel fan on the dresser. He needed white noise to sleep, and showed him the window. He stood on his toes and looked out at the dock and the water going gray in the evening light. He seemed okay. Calmer than he'd been in weeks, actually. Kathy and I took the front bedroom and spent the first hour or so unpacking, figuring out the kitchen, locating the Wi-Fi password on a laminated card stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pelican. Standard rental stuff. I found a drawer full of takeout menus that were probably 5 years old, and a bookshelf with a mix of paperbacks and board games missing pieces. There was a water heater closet in the hallway with a bifold door that didn't quite close flush. I nudged it shut and moved on. Dinner was sandwiches from a cooler because we hadn't shopped yet. We ate on the back porch. The creek was quiet, the air smelled like salt and mud, and Evan ate his sandwich and watched a heron stand motionless at the edge of the marsh on the opposite bank for about 15 minutes straight. He pointed at it every few minutes, like we might have forgotten it was there. We hadn't. That was the first evening. It was fine. Easy even. The kind of start that makes you exhale and think, yeah, this was the right call. The smell thing happened later that night. We'd gotten Evan to bed around 9, and Kathy and I were sitting in the living room with the ceiling fan going and the windows cracked. She'd been quiet for a few minutes, which sometimes just means she's tired and sometimes means she's working something out. I was reading, or trying to. I'd brought a paperback I'd already started twice and never finished. I'm not great at vacation reading. I always bring the wrong book. "Does it smell weird to you?" she said. I sniffed. There was something, yeah. Not bad exactly, but present. underneath the cleaning products, and whoever had cleaned the place had used a lot of them. Pine sol or something close. There was something older, damp and organic, like the creek mud had gotten into the wood at some point and just stayed there. Old house near the water, I said. Probably normal. Probably, she said, but she kept her face turned slightly like she was still trying to place it. We talked about it for maybe 2 more minutes. Agreed it was likely the water, the age of the place, the fact that the whole town smelled a little like low tide, if you were being honest. Kathy seemed to accept that. I did too. We went to bed. I didn't think about it again. The second night, Evan came into our room at 2 a.m. I heard the door and was awake before he reached the bed. That's just how I sleep when Evan's in the house. 1 level below the surface, ready to come up. He was standing next to my side, holding the hem of his sleep shirt in both hands the way he does when he's anxious, pulling it down and releasing it, pulling it down. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low. Kathy stirred but didn't wake. "What's up?" "There's a man in my room," he said. I sat up. "What do you mean?" "Standing in the corner." He said it the same way he'd say, "There's a spider." Direct, no drama, just reporting. "By the closet. He was watching me." I got up and took his hand and walked him back down the hall to the back bedroom. The door was open the way we'd left it. I went in first, turned on the overhead light. The room was exactly what it was, a bedroom. Dresser, bed, travel fan humming on the dresser, window showing the dark outside. I checked the closet. I looked behind the door. I got down on my hands and knees and looked under the bed. Dust and one of Evan's socks he'd apparently kicked under there. "See?" I said. "Nothing here." He was standing in the doorway looking at the corner by the closet. He didn't look entirely convinced, but he didn't argue. I got him back into bed, tucked the sheet around him, sat on the edge of the mattress until his breathing evened out. The travel fan was doing its thing. The room was quiet. I walked back to our bedroom and got into bed and lay there for a minute, staring at the ceiling. Bad dream. Kid had a hard year. New place, unfamiliar sounds. Of course, I'd checked the room. There was nothing there. I believed that without any hesitation. Not because I was trying to convince myself, but because it was the obvious explanation and it fit every fact I had. I closed my eyes. The ceiling fan wobbled overhead. Down the hall, Evan's little travel fan hummed. The house was quiet. The rental felt like exactly what it was supposed to be. I had no reason yet to think otherwise. The 4th day started fine. Sunny, warm, the kind of morning where you think maybe you've been overthinking everything. Kathy and I were drinking coffee on the back porch while Evan ate cereal inside and watched something on his tablet. The creek was doing its thing. Slow, brown, a couple of egrets standing in the shallows like they owned the place. I was actually relaxed. That's the part I keep coming back to. I was genuinely relaxed. Then Kathy said, "This room feels like someone else is in it." I looked at her. She was holding her mug with both hands, looking out at the water. She wasn't being dramatic about it. That was just the thing she said. "The house?" I asked. "Our bedroom, specifically." She took a sip. "Not just the smell. It's like, I don't know, like when you walk into a room right after someone left it." I didn't say anything for a second. I was trying to figure out if she was still half asleep or actually reporting something. "That's just old houses," I said. "They hold on to stuff. Temperature, moisture, whatever." She looked at me. "I know what old houses feel like." She did. She grew up in one. I let it go for a second and then I said, "You've been sleeping fine though, right?" "With the bathroom light on." I hadn't noticed that. I mean, I'd noticed the light under the door, but I hadn't put it together. I figured she'd gotten up at some point and just left it. "Since when?" I asked. Since the second night. That was 4 nights. She'd been sleeping with the light on for 4 nights and hadn't mentioned it. I didn't know what to do with that, so I made a joke. I said something like, "Should I check under the bed again?" And she gave me the look she gives me when she knows I'm deflecting and she's going to let me do it anyway. She went back inside. I sat there another few minutes finishing my coffee, looking at the creek. I wasn't worried. That's the honest answer. Kathy had good instincts about people, but houses were different. Houses made noises, old ones near water especially. I'd looked up the McClellanville area before we came. Tidal flooding, humidity, the whole thing. Houses down here moved and breathed in ways that newer construction didn't. That was my explanation, and it was a decent one. I went inside to check on Evan. He was fine, completely fine. Cereal bowl empty, tablet propped against the sugar bowl, watching something with a dog in it. He looked up and said, "Can we go crabbing today?" And I said yes, before I even thought about whether we had the right equipment. We did, barely. There was a bucket in the shed, and I'd bought a cheap hand line at a gas station outside of Monk's Corner. Good enough. The water heater closet was in the hallway. I walked past it on the way to the kitchen, and the door was standing open. Not wide open, just a few inches, like the latch hadn't caught. I almost kept walking. I don't know why I stopped. I wasn't looking for anything. I pushed the door open the rest of the way and looked inside. It was a standard utility closet, small, smelled like dust and old metal. The water heater was on the left, pipes running up the wall, a little corrosion around the base fittings. Normal. The floor had that gritty feel under my shoes, like sand had worked its way in from outside. Behind the water heater, on the back wall, there was a maintenance access panel, maybe 18 inches by 24, the kind held in place with 4 flathead screws. In a house this old, the rental listing had said 1940-something. I'd have to check. You'd expect those screws to be rusted, or at least have dust packed into the grooves. The kind of thing that hadn't been touched in years and looked it. These didn't look like that. I crouched down. The metal on the screw heads was clean, not shiny, not new, just clean. No rust on the threading where it met the panel. The paint around the edges of the panel was intact, no cracking, but the screws themselves had that dull gray look of metal that's been turned recently and wiped off. I pressed my thumb against one. No grit, no resistance when I tested it lightly. I sat there for a second. The water heater ticked. I took out my phone and took 4 photos. Close on each screw, then one of the whole panel. I don't know exactly what I thought I was documenting. Something felt off and I wanted a record of it, that was all. I wasn't panicking. I was just noting it. I messaged the Verbo contact that afternoon after we'd taken Evan crabbing. I kept the message pretty neutral. Said I'd found the water heater closet open and noticed the access panel screws looked recently disturbed. Wanted to confirm whether anyone had been in the unit for maintenance recently. I attached 2 of the photos, sent it, and put my phone in my pocket. Evan caught 2 crabs off the dock, small ones. We threw them back and he made me promise we'd come back the next day and try again. I said yes. We ate dinner on the porch, sandwiches, nothing fancy, and Evan fell asleep before 8:30, which was early even for him. Good tired, the kind that comes from sun and fresh air and actually doing something. I stood in his doorway for a second after I turned his lamp off. He was out cold, one arm hanging off the mattress. The travel fan hummed. I didn't hear back from the VRBO contact that night, or the next day. 2 days later, a message came through from the account holder. His name was Orion Parsons. The message was about 4 sentences. It said maintenance had been out to the property the previous month for a routine inspection. All systems had been checked and were in order, and the access panel would have been part of that. He thanked me for flagging it. That was it. No apology for the delay, no offer to follow up, just Here is the explanation. We're done here. I read it twice. It was a completely reasonable explanation. Maintenance visit, recent enough that the screws hadn't had time to rust back over. That was it. That was the whole thing. I exhaled. Actually exhaled. The kind where you didn't realize you'd been holding something until it left. I put my phone down on the kitchen counter and went to find Kathy. She was in the living room with a book. She looked up and I said, "Heard back about the access panel. Maintenance was here last month. That's why the screws look new." She nodded. "Okay," she said. "So that's what it was." "Okay," she said again. She went back to her book. I stood there for a second. I wanted her to say something more, I think, like, "See, nothing weird, we're fine." But she just kept reading, so I went and got a beer from the fridge and sat on the porch. What came after that was 3 of the better days of the trip. I don't know how else to say it. The house just settled. The feeling Kathy had been describing, that occupied quality, the thing she couldn't pin down. She stopped mentioning it. She slept without the bathroom light on. I know because I got up once around 3 to get water and the hallway was dark. I noticed it the way you notice when a noise you'd stopped hearing finally stops. Evan didn't bring up the tall man again. Not once. He was just a kid on vacation. Loud, sticky-fingered, constantly asking what was for dinner. We went crabbing again, and he caught 4, which he considered a personal triumph. I drove out to Mount Pleasant one afternoon for groceries, and he came with me and spent 20 minutes in the cereal aisle before I told him he had to pick one. He picked 2. I let it go. We ate at T.W. Graham and Comer 2 nights in a row because the first night Evan ordered the fried shrimp and declared it the best thing he'd ever eaten. And the second night he ordered it again, and the declaration stood. The place was small, right there on the waterfront, wood floors and the smell of the creek coming through the screen door. The second night, the waitress recognized Evan and brought his shrimp out without him having to order. He thought that was the greatest thing that had ever happened to him. I watched his face when she set the plate down and I thought, this is it. This is what the trip was supposed to be. I drove us back to the rental both nights with the windows down. Evan fell asleep in the back seat before we hit the main road. Kathy had her feet up on the dash, which she knows I don't love, but I didn't say anything. The house was dark when we pulled in. I carried Evan inside, put him to bed. The travel fan hummed. I genuinely thought we'd turned a corner. I believed that. Whatever the first few days had been, adjustment, bad dreams, old house sounds, Kathy's nerves and mine, it had passed. The vacation was becoming what I'd needed it to be. I had the Orion Parsons message saved in my phone. The explanation was right there. It fit. I stopped thinking about the screws entirely. The 9th night I was out on the back porch past midnight because I couldn't sleep. That was normal by then. I'd been doing it most nights, just sitting out there in the dark with a can of whatever was left in the fridge, watching the creek. The water was black at that hour. You could hear it though. Little sounds, the dock shifting, something moving through the grass on the bank. I liked it out there. It was the one part of the trip that felt uncomplicated. I had my phone face down on the armrest. Kathy was asleep. Evan was asleep. The house behind me was quiet. Then it wasn't. It started as this low, rhythmic sound from inside. Not loud, not dramatic. Just weight on wood, slow and even, like someone walking very carefully, heel to toe, trying not to be heard. I sat there for a second just listening, trying to place it. The house was old. Old houses make noise. I knew that. I'd been telling myself that for days. But this wasn't the random pop of a beam or the groan of a wall expanding. It had a pattern. It moved. I went inside. The screen door banged behind me, and I stood in the kitchen and listened. Nothing. Total quiet. The travel fan in Evan's room. The refrigerator. That was it. I stood there for probably 2 minutes just waiting. and the house gave me nothing back. I walked the rooms anyway, checked the hallway, checked the living room, looked in the bathroom, which felt stupid, even while I was doing it. Evan's door was closed and I cracked it open. He was on his side, the blanket pulled up, completely out. I pulled the door back shut. Kathy was asleep in our room. I stood in the hallway for another minute and felt like an idiot. I went back to bed. The unease didn't go with me, but I didn't have anything to attach it to, so I just let it sit there. I figured it was the house. I figured I was tired and the creak sounds were getting into my head. I probably slept around 2. The next night it came back. Same time, roughly. I was in the hallway. I'd gotten up for water, and I heard it again. The weight on wood sound, same slow rhythm, coming from somewhere close. I stopped moving, and then underneath it, almost underneath it, I heard breathing. Not mine. It was coming from behind the wall to my left, the hallway wall. Slow and measured, the way someone breathes when they're trying to be quiet and they're not quite managing it. I stood there, and my whole body went very still. I didn't make a decision to press my ear to the plaster. I just did it. The breathing stopped, not gradually, not the way sound trails off when someone moves away. It just cut off. One breath, then nothing. The way you stop when you realize the other person can hear you. I stood there with my cheek against the wall for a long time. The plaster was cool. I could feel the texture of it against my skin. The house was completely silent. I didn't move for probably 3 minutes, maybe more. Then I walked back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and didn't lie down. I didn't sleep that night. Kathy woke up around 6 and found me sitting at the kitchen table with my phone. She asked if I was okay. I said I hadn't slept great. She looked at me for a second and then made coffee and didn't push it. That's one of the things I appreciate about her. She reads the room. I didn't tell her about the breathing. Not then. I spent the morning searching the rental property online. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Complaints, reviews, something. The Virbo listing had reviews, but they were all fine. 4.5 stars. Great location, close to the water. That kind of thing. I went deeper, tried the address, tried the property name. Nothing useful came up for a while, then I found it. It was a cached page from a review aggregator site, one of those third-party ones that pulls from multiple platforms. The review was 14 months old and the user account was gone. The name just showed as deleted user in gray text, but the review was still there in the cache. I read it twice. The reviewer said they'd left early. They had 2 kids, both under 10. On the 3rd night, the kids started saying they could hear someone moving inside the walls. The reviewer described it the same way I would have. Rhythmic, slow, like footsteps. They said they called the property manager and he told them it was animals. Raccoons or possums getting under the raised foundation, common in older coastal homes. Nothing to worry about. They left anyway. The review said they asked for a partial refund and didn't get one. The account was gone now. The review was the only thing left. I sat with that for a while. Then I called the number listed for the Georgetown property manager. His name was Liam Lee. It was on the VRBO listing in small print under Managed By. The call went to voicemail the first time. I left a message, kept it short, said I was a current guest and had some concerns about the property, and could he call me back. He called back about 40 minutes later.
"Yeah, this is Liam,"
he said. Low voice, unhurried. Coastal drawl. I told him what I'd heard. The sound on the 9th night, then the breathing on the 10th. I kept it factual. I didn't editorialize. I said I'd also found the old review and that the description matched what I was experiencing. There was a pause.
"Raccoons,"
he said, just like that. He said it the way you say something you've said many times before. He told me the house sat on a raised foundation, that the crawl space ran the full length of the property. that raccoons and possums got in there all the time. He said sound traveled weird in old coastal houses, up through the floors, through the walls, made it seem like it was right next to you when it was actually underneath. He said he'd send someone to check the crawl space and make sure the access points were sealed. I asked about the breathing. Another pause, shorter this time.
Sound carries.
He said.
Could have been anything. Could have been your own breathing echoing off the plaster. Happens.
I didn't say anything for a second.
I'll get someone out there.
He said.
Probably end of the week. You're good until then.
He hung up before I could ask a follow-up question. Not rudely, exactly, just done with it. Conversation over. I set my phone on the kitchen table and looked at it. The raccoon explanation was plausible. I knew that. Raised foundation, old house, coastal South Carolina. Sure, animals got in. It happened. And the breathing thing, I mean, he wasn't wrong that sound does weird things in old buildings. I'd experienced that. I'd told Evan that. But the review had said the exact same thing. The same sounds, the same explanation, the same property manager. And the person who left that review had packed up their kids and left. Liam Lee did not call back. I sat at that table for a long time after, and the fear I'd been carrying since the night before, the formless low-grade kind, had changed. It had edges now. I didn't know what shape it was yet, but it wasn't formless anymore. Evan found me in the kitchen around 5 in the afternoon. I was standing at the counter with a glass of water I hadn't drunk yet, just kind of holding it, watching the light go flat over the creek through the window above the sink. I'd been doing that a lot that day, standing somewhere, thinking I was doing something, realizing I wasn't. He came in quiet. He did that sometimes. Just appeared at your elbow without any warning because he moved soft and didn't announce himself. I noticed him and set the glass down. "Hey, bud." He looked up at me, didn't say anything right away. He had this thing where he'd work up to something, like he was deciding whether to say it or not, and you could see it on his face if you knew him well enough. I knew him well enough. "What's up?" I said. He reached out and took my hand. Not the way kids do when they want something, not pulling or tugging, just held it, like he wanted me to come with him. So I went. He led me down the hall to his room, the back bedroom, the one I'd put him in on the first night because it faced Jeremy Creek, and he loved watching the shrimp boats. That had seemed like a good call at the time. I had felt good about it even. That's the part I keep coming back to. The room was the way he kept it. Bed half made, his sneakers by the door, a small pile of Lego pieces on the desk that he'd been slowly organizing by color for about 3 days. It smelled like him, that particular kid smell. A little like sunscreen and sleep. The late afternoon light came in sideways through the window and made the whole room look orange and heavy. He walked me to the far wall, the one with the baseboard vent near the floor, and he stopped. He let go of my hand and pointed at it. "He comes from there," Evan said. "Not the door, the wall." I looked at him first. His face was completely serious. No drama, no performance. He was just telling me a fact the way he always told me facts, straight and plain. Because he hadn't learned yet to soften things or worry about how they'd land. Then I looked at the vent. It was a standard baseboard vent, metal, painted over a few times from the look of it. Maybe 8 inches wide, 4 inches tall. The kind in every house built before someone decided forced air was better. There were 4 screws holding the faceplate on. I crouched down. The screws were clean, not just clean, bright, no rust, no paint in the threads, no dust collected in the heads the way screws get when they've been sitting in the same position in a coastal house for 20 years. These looked like they'd been turned recently, not once, multiple times. I'd seen screws exactly like these once already on this trip. On the access panel behind the water heater closet. The one I'd photographed and sent to the Varbo contact, The one Orion Parsons had told me was fine, maintenance had been out, everything in order. I stayed crouched there for a second, maybe longer than a second. The water heater closet was on the other end of the rear wall. I thought about that. The rear wall, the full length of it, the access panel on one end and the vent screws on the other, and the space in between, and what that space would have to be for both of those things to be true at the same time. My knees were starting to ache from crouching on the hardwood, but I didn't stand up yet. I thought about the breathing I'd heard behind the plaster 2 nights ago, slow and even and present right there on the other side of the wall, and then cut off, not faded, not tapered, just gone. The instant I pressed my ear close enough that whoever was on the other side would have heard the difference in the air, the change in pressure, someone breathing quietly and then choosing not to breathe. I thought about the footsteps I'd heard the night before that, weight on wooden boards, slow and deliberate, and then nothing the second I came inside. I thought about Evan waking up screaming, not once, multiple nights. A 7-year-old boy in the back bedroom, the room closest to the rear wall, lying in bed 2 feet from a vent with clean screws. I thought about the review. The kids heard someone in the walls. That was the exact phrasing. Not something. Someone. Liam Lowe had told them it was animals. He'd told me it was animals. I put my hand on the vent cover. Didn't pull at it, just touched it. The metal was cool. I pressed lightly at one corner and it shifted. Barely, maybe a millimeter. But it moved with the easy give of something that wasn't seated tight. Something that had been moved before. I took my hand back. I stood up slowly and turned around. Evan was watching me from a few feet back, arms loose at his sides, that wide, careful look on his face. "Does he come every night?" I said. I kept my voice level. I was very focused on keeping my voice level. Evan thought about it. "Most nights," he said. "Does he talk to you?" "No." "Does he do anything?" Evan shook his head. "Just watches." I nodded. "Okay," I said. "Thanks for showing me." He nodded back, very serious, like we'd concluded a meeting. I walked out of the room and down the hall to the kitchen, and I stood there for a minute with my hands flat on the counter. The glass of water was still where I'd left it. I wasn't scared, exactly. That's not the right word for it. It was more like everything had just gotten very simple. All the things that hadn't made sense, all the things I'd explained away or filed under probably nothing, or old house, coastal South Carolina, that's just how it is. They'd all just collapsed into one thing, one explanation, clean and complete and terrible. There was a maintenance corridor behind the water heater. It ran the length of the rear wall. Someone had been using it. Someone had been in there for, I didn't know how long. Weeks, maybe. Moving around back there, listening, watching through the vent while my 7-year-old brother slept 2 feet away in the room I'd chosen for him because it faced the water. Not an animal, not the house settling, not a dream, not echoing plaster or weird acoustics or anything else Liam Lowe had offered me over the phone in that flat, done-with-it voice. A person. Kathy came in from the back porch a few minutes later. She had her phone in her hand and she was about to say something. I could tell from her face. Some normal evening thing. "What do you want for dinner? Did you see the boats?" And she stopped when she looked at me. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. She could read me. I told her to sit down. I told her about the vent screws, about the access panel screws, about the rear wall and the corridor, and what Evan had said. Not the door, the wall. And I watched her face go through about 4 different things in the space of 30 seconds. "How long?" she said. "I don't know." She looked toward the hallway, toward the back bedroom. "He's been in there while Evan was sleeping," she said. "Yeah." She was quiet for a second. What do we do? I'd already been thinking about that. I'd been thinking about it since I stood up from the floor of Evan's room. I had a shape for it. I knew what the next few minutes needed to look like. We're going to get Evan, I said. And we're getting in the car. Kathy moved fast once she understood. That's one thing about her. When she's in, she's in. She went straight to Evan's room, and I heard her voice go calm and easy, the way she did when she didn't want him to pick up on anything. I don't know what she told him. Something about an adventure. Something about going to get snacks. Evan loved snacks. I grabbed my keys off the kitchen counter and my phone off the charger, and I stood in the living room for about 4 seconds just listening to the house. Nothing. No creak, no shift, no breath. Just the ceiling fan clicking on its slow rotation, and the distant sound of something moving on the creek. I kept my face neutral for Evan's sake when they came back down the hall. He was in his pajamas, the ones with the little sharks on them. He had his stuffed thing, some kind of creature that was half dog, half something else. He'd named it Biscuit 2 years ago, and the name had stuck, tucked under his arm. He looked at me, and then at Kathy, and then back at me. "Where are we going?" he said. "Piggly Wiggly Run," I said, "a big one." He seemed to accept that. 7-year-olds are pretty good at accepting things when you say them like they're obvious. I got them out the front door and down the porch steps and into the car. Kathy had her cardigan on and her purse, and she was holding it together, but her jaw was tight. I could see it. I got Evan buckled in the back, and I closed his door, and I came around to the driver's side where Kathy was waiting. "You're driving," I said. She looked at me. "I need you to take them to the Piggly Wiggly on 17, I said, quiet enough that Evan couldn't hear through the glass. "Park there. Call 911. Tell them there's someone living in the walls of this address. Give them the full address." "And you're coming right behind us," she said. "Yeah. Phoenix. Kathy, he needs to be away from this house. You need to be with him." I handed her my keys. "I'll be right behind you." She didn't like it. She took the keys.
Don't come back,
I said.
Whatever I say when I call you, don't come back here.
She looked at me for a long second. "Okay," she said. Not happy about it, but okay. I stepped back. She got in. I watched the car back down the gravel drive and turn onto the road, and then the taillights were gone, and the sound of the engine faded out, and it was just me and the house and the dark and the creek smell and whatever was behind the walls. I stood there for probably 30 seconds. Then my phone buzzed. "Kathy, already. We're moving. You better actually be behind us." I started to type back that I would be, and that's when I remembered the medication. It hit me like stepping off a curb you didn't see. Evan's prescription. The small orange bottle on his nightstand in the back bedroom. He took it every morning without fail. Had to. Missing a morning wasn't a disaster, but missing 2 in a row got complicated fast. And we were 2 hours from his doctor, and I didn't have a backup, and the pharmacy situation out here was not exactly convenient. I knew all of this in about 1 second. I also knew the back bedroom door was locked. Evan locked it every night out of habit. I'd watched him do it the whole trip. Little hand on the button lock, twist, done, without even thinking about it. He'd done it when we left tonight, too. I hadn't registered it at the time because my brain was elsewhere. The key was on a hook in the kitchen, a little brass hook by the back door with a tag on it that said BR2 in marker. I'd seen it the first day. Kathy didn't have it. I stood on the porch and worked through the options. There weren't many. The window was an option theoretically, but the back bedroom window faced the rear of the property, which meant it faced the side of the house closest to wherever the corridor ran, and I wasn't going to stand outside that window in the dark trying to work a screen loose. That left the key. I texted Kathy. "Forgot Evan's meds. Back bedroom key is inside. Give me 10 minutes, she called immediately.
Don't,
she said.
It's fine. Phoenix, don't go back in that house. He needs the medication by morning. We'll figure it out. There's nothing to figure out. I know where the key is. I know where the bottle is. I'll be in and out in 2 minutes.
She was quiet. I could hear Evan asking something in the background and her telling him 1 second.
Call me the whole time,
She said.
I'll call you when I'm out. That's not... Kathy, call 911. I'll be right behind you.
I hung up. That was probably not the right move. I'd deal with that later. I went back inside. The house was dark. I hadn't left any lights on. I didn't want to think about what a lit house looked like from inside a wall. I stood in the front room and let my eyes adjust. The streetlight from the road came through the front windows just enough to make shapes. The couch, the coffee table, the doorway to the hall. I knew this layout. I'd walked it 100 times in 2 weeks. I didn't need lights. I also didn't turn any on because some part of me understood, without deciding to understand it, that I didn't want to announce where I was. I moved toward the kitchen. Slow, even steps. The floors in this house creaked in specific places. I knew most of them by now without meaning to learn them. Third board past the couch, the spot just before the kitchen doorway. I stepped around both. I got to the kitchen, found the hook by feel. Right side of the back door, shoulder height, little brass hook. The key was there, small and cold. I closed my hand around it. The house was quiet. Then the corridor creaked. Not loud, not dramatic. Just weight on wood, slow and deliberate, somewhere behind the hallway wall. One shift and then nothing. I didn't stop moving. I didn't freeze. I just kept going, back out of the kitchen and into the hall. And I kept my eyes forward and I did not look at the walls. That was a choice I made in real time, and I'd make it again. Looking at the walls wasn't going to help me. The key was in my hand. The bedroom was 12 feet away. I got to the door, put the key in. The lock turned clean. No resistance, no drama. I pushed it open. The back bedroom was dark. The nightstand was on the left side of the bed, Evan's side. I crossed to it and my hand found the orange bottle and I closed my fingers around it and I put it in my pocket. I stood there for 1 second in that room. The vent was in the baseboard to my right. I didn't look at it. I walked back out into the hall, pulled the door shut, didn't bother locking it. The house made no sound. I walked back through the hall and through the living room and out the front door, and I pulled it closed behind me and I walked down the porch steps and down the gravel drive to the road. I called Kathy.
I'm out.
I said,
I'm walking. Come get me at the end of the drive.
Kathy pulled up maybe 3 minutes after I called. No headlights until she was almost at the end of the drive, which was smart. I didn't ask her to do that, she just did it. I got in the passenger seat. Didn't say anything for a second. The orange bottle was in my jacket pocket, and I could feel it there, that small weight. And I just sat with that for a moment.
You okay?
She said. Yeah. She pulled out onto the road and didn't ask anything else. That was the right call. I wasn't ready to talk, and she knew it without me saying so. That's Kathy. Evan was in the back seat in his seatbelt, still in his pajamas. The ones with the little sharks on them. Blue background, white sharks. He had his knees pulled up and his arms around them. He was watching me through the gap between the front seats. Not scared exactly. More like he was waiting to find out if he was supposed to be scared. I turned around and handed him the bottle.
Here you go, bud.
He took it and held it in both hands and looked at it. Then he looked at me. He didn't say anything. I told him it was fine. We were going to the parking lot for a little while, and then we'd figure out the rest. He nodded like that made sense. 7-year-olds are pretty good at accepting things when you say them calmly. I was grateful for that right then. Kathy drove us to the Piggly Wiggly on Highway 17. It was the closest lit parking lot, and she'd already been sitting there when she called 911, so I guess it made sense to go back. There were 2 other cars in the lot at that hour, a pickup near the entrance, and a sedan at the far end with someone asleep in the reclined driver's seat. Not a soul paying attention to us. The store was closed, obviously. The lights in the parking lot were those yellow-orange sodium ones that make everything look a little jaundiced. Kathy parked near the middle of the lot and killed the engine. I still had my jacket on. I hadn't changed out of what I was wearing earlier. I don't think any of us had really processed that we'd just left the house with basically nothing. Evan's medication, my phone, Kathy's purse from the passenger seat where she'd left it. That was the inventory. 2 weeks of luggage, our chargers, Evan's stuffed bear that he'd been sleeping with since he was 4, all of it still in the house. That part didn't hit me until later. Right then, I was just sitting in a parking lot at 1 in the morning trying to breathe normally. Kathy had already called 911 from the lot before she came to get me. She told me that on the drive over. I called. They're sending someone. She didn't know exactly what to tell them, she said. She told them she thought someone was living in the walls of the rental house and gave them the address, and they said deputies were on the way. I don't know what the dispatcher made of that. Probably filed it under possible mental health situation, until the deputies actually got there and found the access panel. And then I imagine the radio traffic got a lot more interesting. We sat in the car. Kathy moved to the back seat at some point and got Evan settled against her, his head on her shoulder. He was quiet, not asleep, just quiet. His eyes were open and he was looking at the dashboard through the gap in the seats. I stayed in the front. I had my phone in my hand, but I wasn't doing anything with it. I was just holding it. At some point, maybe 40 minutes after Kathy's call, maybe a little more, I got a call from a Georgetown County number, a deputy. He asked if I was the individual who had reported a possible intruder at the McClellanville address. And I said yes. And he said they had located a person inside a utility corridor in the structure. He said the individual was alive. He asked if anyone in our party had been physically injured, and I said no. He said they'd need a statement, and could I come back to the property or come to the substation in Georgetown? I said I'd come to the property. Kathy looked at me from the back seat when I said that, but didn't argue. The deputy's voice was flat and professional. He wasn't giving me anything beyond the basics. I asked how long they thought the person had been in there, and he said investigators would have to determine that, and he couldn't speculate. I asked if the person was coherent, and there was a small pause, and he said the individual had been transported to a hospital. I said, okay. He said someone would meet me at the property. I didn't go back that night. I want to be clear about that. I thought about it for maybe 10 minutes, and then I thought about Evan in the back seat not talking, and I didn't go. I called the deputy back and asked if the statement could wait until morning, and he said yes, that was fine, just don't leave the area. I said I wouldn't. I found out the rest in pieces over the next couple of days. The man in the corridor was alive, but in bad shape, malnourished. His clothes were, I don't know how to put this. They'd basically fused to him from weeks of not being changed. He was incoherent when they found him. They estimated he'd been in the utility space somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks, maybe longer. The corridor ran the full length of the rear wall, which I already knew by then, and there were signs he'd been moving through it regularly. No charges held. That's the part that still bugs me a little when I think about it. The prosecutor couldn't establish with enough legal precision what the man had actually done. He'd been in the walls. He'd been there for weeks while we slept. But what he'd done, technically, in a way that would stick in court, apparently that was harder to pin down than you'd think. I don't know enough about how that works to be angry at anyone specific. I'm just telling you what happened. The 3 of us stayed in that parking lot until the sun came up. Kathy held Evan in the back seat for most of it. I leaned my seat back and stared at the roof of the car. The sodium lights outside made everything that orange color, and I could see it through my closed eyelids. I kept my eyes closed. I knew this route by heart. Evan spoke first around 6 in the morning. We'd been in that parking lot for hours. The Piggly Wiggly was closed, obviously. so the lot was empty except for us and one shopping cart someone had left near the cart return that kept shifting a little whenever the wind picked up. That orange sodium light was still going. The sky was getting that gray-blue color it gets before the sun actually shows up, and I was watching it through the windshield because there was nothing else to do. Kathy had her arms around Evan in the back seat. I'd checked on them maybe 4 or 5 times through the night, just turning around and looking. Evan was awake for most of it. I could tell because his eyes were open and he was staring at the back of the headrest in front of him, not moving, not talking. Kathy had her chin on top of his head. She wasn't asleep either. Nobody was. Then Evan said, "Is it gone?" Not a question, really. The way he said it was flat. Just those 3 words. Kathy looked at me in the rearview mirror. I turned around. "Yeah," I said. "It's gone." He nodded once. Then he went back to staring at the headrest. That was it. That was the first thing he said after 9 hours of nothing. I turned back around and looked at the parking lot. The shopping cart shifted again. I kept my hands in my lap. We drove back to the house that afternoon to get our stuff. The deputies had cleared it by then, and someone had left a card on the kitchen counter with a case number and a phone number for a victim services line. I put it in my pocket and then left it there until it went through the wash. Kathy packed most of the bags. I let her because she was doing it with this focused, quiet energy, and I figured the task was helping her. I packed my own bag and then packed Evan's. He stood in the doorway of the back bedroom and watched me do it. He didn't come in. He stayed right at the threshold with one hand on the door frame, and I worked fast, just grabbing his clothes off the chair and his Nintendo from the nightstand and his medication and stuffing it all in the bag without folding anything. The vent was still there. I didn't look at it. I zipped the bag and picked it up and walked back to the door, and Evan stepped aside to let me through. He didn't look into the room again. He just turned and walked toward the front of the house, and I followed him, and that was the last time either of us were in that room. We were on the road by 2 in the afternoon. Kathy drove. I sat in the passenger seat, and Evan sat in the back with his Nintendo on his lap, not playing it. He watched out the window the whole drive. When we passed through McClellanville on Highway 17, he looked at the water for a second and then looked away. The thing I kept coming back to in the car and then for a long time after was the back bedroom. I'd picked it for him because of the view. That's the whole reason. Jeremy Creek was right there, and Evan had spent half the first day with his face pressed to the window screen watching a shrimp boat move through. He'd asked me what the nets were for. I'd explained it badly, and he'd nodded anyway. He'd been happy. That's the thing I can't get around. He'd been genuinely happy in that room for about 12 hours before everything else started. And I'd put him there because of the view, and the view was real, and the happiness was real. And none of that changes the fact that the room was also the closest point to the corridor. Every night he'd been in there. The vent was 2 feet from his bed. The screws were clean. Someone had been on the other side. I know the logic. I know I didn't know. I know a reasonable person with the same information would have made the same call. I've had that conversation with myself probably 200 times by now, and it always lands in the same place, which is that I'm right about the logic, and it doesn't help at all. He needed somewhere quiet. That was the whole trip. Quiet and easy and low stakes. Just a couple of weeks where nothing was required of him, and he could watch boats and eat at the same restaurant twice because he liked the food. That's what I was trying to give him. And I gave him 9 nights in the room closest to the wall. The new thing I noticed in the weeks after we got back was the scanning. Before Evan walked into a room, any room, his bedroom at home, the school cafeteria when I picked him up, the waiting area at his pediatrician's office, he'd stop at the door and look. Not long, maybe 3 seconds. He'd move his eyes around the corners, and then he'd go in. He did it every single time. I noticed it the first week. I didn't say anything because what would I say? I watched him do it at the grocery store, at his friend Marcus's apartment, at the diner near our place where we went for breakfast on Saturdays. Every room, every time. His pediatrician said it was a normal response. She used a word I'm not going to try to spell. She said kids adapt, that this was his version of adapting, and that it might ease over time. She was kind about it. I appreciated that. It didn't ease much. Not in the first few months anyway, maybe a little eventually. But the habit was in him now, and I'd watch him do it, and I'd think about the back bedroom and the view of the creek and the shrimp boat nets. And then I'd think about the vent screws, and that was usually where I stopped thinking about it because there wasn't anywhere useful to go from there. Kathy and I talked about it once properly. We were sitting on my couch a few weeks after we got back, and she said,
You know none of that was your fault.
I said, yeah. She looked at me for a second.
You don't think that?
I think the logic is right, I said. I just also think I put him in that room. She didn't argue with me. She knows when to let something sit. I looked up the property listing a few months later. It was still up. Different photos, different description, same address. The reviews had been cleared. There was one new review from somebody who said it was charming and close to the water. 4 stars. They knocked off a star because the Wi-Fi was slow. I closed the tab. Evan asked me about it once, about 6 months out. We were driving somewhere, just the two of us, and he said,
Phoenix, was there really a person in the wall?
Yeah, I said. There was. He thought about that for a second.
Did they catch him?
They did. He nodded, looked out the window, then he said,
Okay.
Like he was filing it somewhere. That was the only time he brought it up. I didn't push it. He'd asked what he needed to ask and he'd gotten the answer and he put it away. That's Evan. He's always been like that. Takes things seriously, doesn't make a production out of them. I'm a little jealous of that, honestly. The trip was supposed to be 2 weeks. We left after 9 days. We never went back, obviously. And I haven't booked a vacation rental since. I'm not saying I never will. I'm just saying I haven't. The shrimp boat thing stuck with me, though. A few months later, I found a YouTube channel that's basically just footage of commercial fishing boats, trawlers mostly. And I showed it to Evan one afternoon, and he watched about 40 minutes of it without moving. Just sat there, completely absorbed. He asked if we could go see real ones sometime. Somewhere else, he said. Not there. I told him, yeah, somewhere else. I meant it. I still do. We'll get there.